we actually knew each other growing up in Windhoek. It's a small enough place. And we both had interest in the arts. We went to art school. Helen went to UCT and I went to university currently known as Rose. And we then ended up coming back home, and Helen worked as a freelance in the arts and then worked at the National Art Gallery of Namibia. And I joined her there as well a year or so later. So we both ended up working there together, which was kind of where the idea to become curators and start our own gallery came. We felt, so we had an incredible experience at the National Art Gallery and really got to work in this curatorial role full time, I think, for the first time really for both of us. And so through that experience, we decided that we could bring that into an independent space. And at the moment, or particularly when we started, there weren't really many arts institutions that weren't in some way state funded, either by the Namibian state or foreign states. And we thought that the art scene in general would benefit from having an independent gallery space. And yeah, so we decided to leave with the StArt Art Gallery just after we left the National Art Gallery. And by doing that, we were able to really focus a lot more time on specific artists and work with artists that we really admire.
Like Gina says, I mean, I think that we should also talk a little bit about how, while we work at the National Art Gallery, we made a lot of contacts with artists and we built those relationships. We started building a lot of those relationships there. And through the process of working with them on exhibitions and Gina's work with the collection, that the gap and the need for a contemporary gallery that is not running in parallel with the government. So we have quite an interesting range of artists. As we mentioned, you know, there were very few galleries when we started, and there still are very few galleries. So in a way we had our pick of the bunch, which means that we work with some older, more established artists who have, you know, a 20, 30-year long career already. And then we also work with artists who have just graduated in the last couple of years. So some of those older artists are Philippus Shihama, who still works as a lecturer at the College of the Arts, and Nikki Murray, who recently retired. And then younger artists like Laimu Mbangula, who, when we started working with her, had just graduated from the College of the Arts and has now, this year, is wrapping up her degree at the University of Namibia. And I think having that range of artists is really, really great. Last year, we also had the opportunity of working with a much older artist called Paul Kiddo, who is quite an established painter. And I think we've been very lucky to be able to work with artists like that.
We've also got quite a few artists who are a little bit, I guess mid-career, but it doesn't feel like just that yet. Who have been out of tertiary or diploma education for a while and have been practicing artists. So and then also, like Helen said, a variety of kind of age groups and career places in their career, but also obviously media. So more of these kind of mid-career artists are Ismail Sibute, a sculptor. We've got a lot of printmakers. Printmaking is a really strong medium in Namibian art, contemporary Namibian art, and historically. So of those, there's Lok Panjengo, is a wonderful young printmaker, as well as Petrus Amotenu. Slightly older, more kind of a little bit more of an established career is Ilya Shiwahamba. And then we've got other fantastic artists who work in more of a variety. So Alicia Ngishitange is a printmaker, but she's also a sculptor. So she's another one that we've worked with really closely in the last year or so. We had a second solo exhibition last year at the National Art Gallery of Namibia.
I mean, I think also worth mentioning is that we work with a lot more artists than you see on our website, and that's because we do a lot of projects, we do a lot of group exhibitions, and it's quite hard not to stretch ourselves very thin because there is such a demand for curatorial work in Namibia. So what you see on our website is kind of a smaller selection. I guess I meant a demand on the side of the artists.
Yeah. Right.
But also in terms of the institutions. So we have done freelance curatorial work for the National Art Gallery after we left, but also for the Goethe Institute, who we have quite a good relationship with. So there are platforms in Namibia, there are institutions that are also looking for curators and looking for cultural producers apart from artists. But on the side of the artists, you know, there's a big gap in terms of people who want to create exhibitions, to write about their work, who want to like think about and draw their work in. And that gap is starting to be filled with people quite slowly but steadily. So the Project Room, which is run by Frida Lull, is another contemporary gallery, independent gallery that create exclusive relationships with artists. And then there are independent curators like Nashilongwe Mushanja and Hildegard Titus, who run projects as well. So we're seeing movement, definitely more than there was 10 years ago.
We started with a physical space in 2017. We found a really wonderful old hall that we were able to kind of transform into a small gallery space. And we always knew going into it that we knew that there was a gap of getting Namibian art to meet a wider audience. And so online was obviously the kind of most effective way to do that. So we always knew going into it that we wanted to get into the online space. But naturally, kind of the running of a gallery takes up a lot of time. So that transition towards the gallery space, the online space, was slow at first, but then we sped into it because we ended up both getting an opportunity to do our masters in the UK at the end of 2018. So we knew then, okay, we needed to transition fully online. Was a great way to put our time and energy into creating that online space. And then we obviously then ran it online for a year entirely, which came with challenges. Of course, neither of us was in the country, but we did have support from artists and some other people who helped us out on the ground. But now we're at a stage where we still don't have a physical gallery space, but we are able to combine kind of the traction, the momentum that we've gained through our online space with more in-person interventions. So pop-up, we're working with other galleries and other spaces to create pop-up and just do a lot more activity on the ground as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we were well positioned since we were already running online in 2019. And at the beginning of 2020, we had all sorts of plans for physical exhibitions. And, you know, if I look back at the beginning of last year and I think about what we thought we were going to be doing, it's really quite a different thing, but it hasn't all been negative. I think we've had a really wonderful experience with online art fairs like Turbine Art Fair and Latitudes, and then the African Art Galleries Association fair that happened on Artsy towards the end of last year. And those were the first art fairs we've ever participated in. And with them being online, the huge financial investment that you usually have to do when you attend an international art fair was mitigated by the fact that it was all online. So that was a really great way for us to start that process of attending art fairs. Gina and I both do as much as we can. We really are just a two-person team, but between us we have the skills to make that work. Because we're a small team, we can be very adaptable. So it wasn't long before, after the pandemic started and lockdown really kind of kicked in around the world, that we were able to transition. It wasn't a huge machine that needed to move. It was really just the two of us. But I do think, and of course, with collectors, it's often a months-long conversation, especially when they're buying stuff online. They want to think about it for quite a while and discuss it a lot before they bite the bullet. So, and with the 3 art fairs, some of them were more successful than others, I would say. So overall, definitely a positive experience. And with each successive one, I think we learned something about how to handle that space.
Helen mentioned that we were in a relatively good position when the pandemic struck, but obviously we did have to make a lot of changes last year. So we're taking those adaptations that we did last year into a bit of our planning for this year. The thing that we've taken from last year is collaboration. We've always been open to and looking for collaborations, but particularly last year showed us how effective collaboration can be in kind of the pandemic. So an example, last year we had a wonderful solo exhibition by Nikki Murray that was meant to be in, that was shown in Johannesburg at Guns and Rain with Julie Taylor. And that was already a great collaboration, but then the pandemic struck and lockdown here and in South Africa meant that we had to kind of figure out how to still have this exhibition. And we ended up doing like quite a complex structure, but a really successful structure where the paintings were still hung in Julie Taylor's gallery at Guns and Rain in Joburg. And Julie sat with the paintings on opening night, and we zoomed in with her with an online audience and had a small safe outside gathering in Windhoek where the conversation that Julie and Nikki were having, Nikki was in Windhoek, Julie was in Joburg, was kind of projected onto a wall for a Windhoek audience. So it was a kind of a 3-prong approach, which I found to be really successful. And so we're hoping to take that kind of thinking a little bit more outside the box of where art is and how we can see it into our planning this year. We've got an exhibition opening next week, actually. That's a fully online exhibition. But again, we're looking at finding ways to have a small gathering just with the artists, perhaps for the opening night, to still get that sense of community. But the online session will be the main feature, and we're following that up with other events. So continuing in that way of thinking of how to collaborate, how to best get Namibian art beyond our borders, but also get buy-in from within our borders.
So the pandemic kind of eclipsed Namibia's 30th birthday last year. So 2020 was 30 years of independence from apartheid South African rule. And we wanted to do something to kind of celebrate and acknowledge that. And what we had planned was a photographic exhibition of works by Gina Figueira, who had done photojournalistic work during the time of the struggle. And I think that exhibition was a good success, and it was wonderful to see those works. But we had a lot of conversations around that time about how it was very much Tony's view on the world, and a world that Tony could access. And as a white man under apartheid, he had access to certain things and a certain flexibility of movement that other people didn't. And we started a conversation with Dapwell Wendo, who has written about the relationship between Namibia and South Africa in the past, which is an ongoing and complicated relationship, at least from our side of the border. And she really stimulated a lot of thinking. And between the 3 of us, we decided to start this platform of an archive. And the reason we wanted to do an archive was because we wanted a project that could keep going. You know, so with exhibitions, you put it all together, put it all out there, and then it closes and it's sort of over. And we wanted something that would have an ongoing life that we could keep adding to slowly over time. So the archive is very much looking for what people are willing to share. People aren't always willing to share the very personal stories and photographs they have of that time, but for people who are willing to share them, we have that platform. And we were lucky enough to get some funding from the National Art Council of Namibia's COVID-19 Relief Fund last year. And that funding has gone into supporting the work of artists who want to add to this archive. And that's the exhibition that will be opening next week. So it's 6 artists, and they've all taken very different approaches to the question of adding to this archive and how they might do it. And it's incredibly exciting. I think as a curator, when you kind of put a prompt out there and you see what comes back, it's just always unbelievably gratifying, because the people if you've chosen the right people to work with, the responses are just incredible. So yeah, we're really excited to share that with the world.
Yeah, I think it's making a huge difference. We joined ARGA through the invitation of Julie Taylor. So again, another amazing effect of collaboration is that you opened up to more things than you initially thought your collaboration would be for. So yeah, we were really happy to join it, because I think as much as the Namibian art scene is growing, I mean, due to the tiny population that we have in Namibia, as one factor, the art scene is relatively small. So it's always a real help to get beyond our art scene and chat to peers from all over the continent, and who are representing artists from all over the continent. And it's so nice to chat, because you get to, things that we think are so unique often are actually things that everybody is seeing as a challenge, or things that we think are kind of standard are very unique to our context. So it just is a really great way to get perspective, and of course to open up opportunities for more collaboration on the continent. So it's definitely just a great way to get Namibian art again out there onto the radar beyond just Namibia and beyond just Southern Africa.
It's such a good question, but it's also such a hard question, because Namibian art history hasn't been, I won't say it hasn't been written at all, but it hasn't been written in particularly accessible formats. So pretty much everybody who was making art before, well, not everybody, but the vast majority of people who were making art and making incredible art over the last 100 years are kind of unacknowledged and unrecognized, which means that with a question like this, I just want to rattle off a huge number of names. But we also have the problem of the fact that until 1990, Namibia was always was a colony. So first a German colony, and then a colony run by South Africa and apartheid. So that meant that artists often the narrative of artists often gets subsumed in a different country's narrative. So much older artists from the colonial era, like Erich Meyer or Johannes Blatt, or all of these artists have another nationality and have a strong connection to a different country. And then at the same time, there were Black artists who were working who have really gone completely unacknowledged. And those artists do exist. Their work has been preserved to some extent in the collections of the National Art Gallery and the Arts Association Heritage Trust. But there hasn't been enough research done on them. So that's kind of further back in time. But when we moved to around the 80s and the 90s, that's when people were doing the most exciting work. So In terms of printmakers, I would say Trudy Dix, Samuel Mbengilo, Andrew van Beek, Susan Mitchinson was a printmaker and a painter. And then John Mofungeo, who is kind of commonly referred to as a South African artist, but actually lived and worked in Namibia for the vast majority of his life and was born in the north. And then painters like Paul Kiddo, Christine Marais, Francois de Necker, they all have very distinctive visual languages. And I'm always surprised to think about our history and realize that photographers have quite a strong place in it. So Margaret Courtney Clark, Amy Skuman, Tony Figueira, Helga Kohl. And then also surprisingly, not as much sculpture as you'd think. So Berta Berner and Alpheus Mvula are the big ones that kind of come to mind. But there's a generation of artists who have really made the Namibian art scene what it is, and a lot of them are educators. So those are the people who've really been doing incredible work over the last 20 years, and that's Barbara Bulker, Dasonia Shukangeni, Eric Schnack, Philippus Chihama, Nikki Marais, and actually all of those are, they are all educators as well. So yeah, but I mean, I could also go on and on. I've kind of missed out another generation of artists who all started working in the last 10 years. Yeah, I mean, in terms of seeing them, they are in, so the two major collections that are publicly owned or at least held in a public trust are the collections of the National Art Gallery and then the Namibian Arts Association, but the collection is actually the Arts Association Heritage Trust collection. But that's a technicality. And all of the artists I've mentioned, I'm pretty sure, I can say with some confidence, all of the artists I've mentioned are in one or both of those collections. The biggest problem that these collections face is that they aren't on show permanently anywhere. So the National Art Gallery does quite a good job of having regular exhibitions where it pulls some stuff out of its collection to show, but there's nowhere you can go to see the Arts Association collection or the National Art Gallery collection on a permanent basis.
We have a lot of goals, but I mean, overall, our biggest hope, I think, is that continue to see the growth that we've seen over the past three and more years of the art scene, that really shows that it can grow to support the work that we do and the work that artists do. Like Helen mentioned, I think a bit earlier, there are more and more independent curators or people who are running projects that are dedicated to cultural work in some way or another, and that's really wonderful to see. And alongside that means that we're growing our own network of independent practitioners, which is fantastic, because as much as it's great to be part of organizations like ARGA, or associations like ARGA rather, and others to broaden our horizons, it's also really wonderful to be creating a community locally. We're also wanting to, again, all of our goals feed into this idea of growing the art scene. So one of them is we're really passionate about writing about contemporary Namibian art, because we find that it's so broadly lacking, and where it does exist, it's still in an archive, or it's inaccessible in some way. So that's something that we definitely want to spend time on, to kind of solidify the space that Namibian art occupies on the continent and abroad in these like broader discussions about contemporary art. We also, of course, as a gallery, we want to be building up a collector base, continuing our work that we're doing to do that, and as well as trying to get, we've been able to, I think, through some of the art fairs that we mentioned, but also just through our work online over the past couple of years, we have been able to get a nice collector base internationally, but we're still really committed to getting Namibians rather interested in contemporary Namibian art as well. That interest exists. It's just about, I think, the gap between artists and the market, you know, and that's that gap that we're hoping to fill, to make it easy for Namibian institutions and individuals to buy Namibian art. And then lastly, when it really comes down to what's at the center of it all for us is our artists. I think we want to continue creating an environment where they are able to work safely and reliably and comfortably, you know, and continue to earn livings from there.
When we think about our work, we often sort of mesh our goals for the whole art scene with our personal goals for StArt, because it's all sort of one and the same in the way that we work. I think maybe something Gina didn't mention exactly was that part of that is also trying to create space for more writing about Namibian art, because we know that the legacy of artists is preserved in what is recorded and what is said about them. So that's a big part of what we want to be doing as well.